Alright, our outlines have been cooked in the microwave. This is a prop block that has the frame up outline printed on it. This is something new I'm trying for the sparless props, to put my boron on. And as we said in previous videos, you need an edge on here to run the boron pen along, and that's what these fences are for. They go on here and get bolted down and hold the outline in place and give you a surface to run your boron pen against. These are a little bit rough. I'm still working on the printing parameters, but we're building now, so I'll use them. I'm using a little bit of Pardal wax. You can probably use Johnson Furniture wax or something like that. Just gonna put a little bit of wax on with a Q-tip. Just help keep any glue from the boron process or the building process from sticking on here. This outline is also available on the shared drive. This prop block with outline. I've got it set up to use 256 screws. You could probably convert it to take like a 1mm. No, that's probably 2mm screw. Using brass inserts that are applied with heat. And again, this is a more complex way of building the propeller to make the sparless design, and I don't recommend this for beginners. Once you're getting consistent times above 20-22 minutes, this can start to have an effect on your time, but it's going to be a couple percent at best, so it's getting more popularity now. It's an alternative to the carbon prop, which is even more complex to build. Let's just get this set up. Take a few minutes here. You can skip watching me put screws in this if you want. Oops. Or throwing screws on the ground. If I ever sweep my shop here, I'm going to find so many lost screws and tools and everything else. Now, I'm just going to back this off a little bit and lightly snug the screws. I can still move the fence, but I'm clamping it slightly away so I can get the outline in there. I'm sure I could come up with something with little clips instead of screws. That might be a little quicker to put together, but for now, this is my setup. This one I think I cross-threaded. There we go. This is a 050 ball driver. If I had to do it again, I'd probably get a non-ball driver, just because it would give me a little more control over the angle of getting this screw in. Ball driver is nice to get it into tight situations where you need a little bit of an angle on it, but you don't get quite as much control over the screw. So I think I'd go with a standard driver if I did this again. All right. And the side rails slide in and out, but that wouldn't put any tension on the end here, so this end rail slides along the axis of the main spar and gives clamping motion to the very tip. And since I got one screw somewhere on the floor, I think I'll have to get a spare screw out. I think this could be done with some sort of wedges and clips or something like that. Just trying to come up with an adjustable method here. These screws are sometimes a bit of a pain. Alright, so now I'm just going to back off a quarter turn on all these screws. Just make sure I can slide the rails in and out. Alright. Now the idea is to put the outline in this groove between the center. The center is about 25 thousandths tall, and the outer ramp, which is about, the outer fence, which is about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters tall, and then clamp it in there. So we're going to carefully take our outlines off of the wet form. Just undoing the tape all on the same side and folding it back so it doesn't stick to my outline. Alright, let's go back and do the other side, and we'll hold it vertically so the tip is still taped down, and we're not going to put any undue pressure on the outline. Now, doing this with the Boron pen and this fence mechanism, I don't seem to get any spring back, so the shape ends up being very accurate, which is great. The wet form just needs to get it close to shape. The boron application process will lock it in. Alright, as you remember, I did 2 outlines at once, so I'm going to separate them. You could do one at a time. You got plenty of time while you're messing with one prop to have the other outline in the microwave. So I've always done 2 outlines together, but usually there's been several students waiting for the wet form at the same time, so we expedited. And usually I had several building platforms when we were building them flat, and here I've just got one of these prop blocks built up so far. Now what you want to do is line up the tip first, and it doesn't hurt to, I didn't do it, but it doesn't hurt to put a line on the outline where the center was on the wet form, so you can get that centered in the fixture here. I Need a little stick. I'm going to get my Boron Pen wedged stick to help me lock this in. I've got a little bit of a kink up at the nose. I'm not positive this one's going to work out. We'll see if we can get it in here, get it behaving. You want to start just getting it into the inside the fence. We'll worry about getting it in the groove as we go along. Then we want to get this tip portion in the groove and then slide the tip fence in place. I'm going to get my eyes on. Yeah, that's not quite in there. I do have a little bit of a kink on that one. I think we'll start with the other one, see how that goes, and then we'll come back to the kinked one. Not a big deal to toss one at this point. Don't have a lot invested. Once you put the boron on, you get a little more invested in it, time-wise and material-wise. So I'm going to put it into the slot at this first screw on the straight side, just lightly, just to hold it in place and help me to work with that tip. This is really the hardest part of this whole process, is getting it on this fixture and behaving. I think I got that clamp too tight on that one. Now it's behaving. Alright, so now I can slide that tip clamp in. Just be careful of these loose ends back here. Don't drive them into your shirt or whatever and break them off. Now once you get that tip in the groove, the rest of this goes pretty nicely. And you're going to want to trim off this end, wherever my blade went. There we go. And I'm going to trim it off a little bit long, but it's going to have to meet up with the spar. So I'm going to trim it right about at the middle of the spar slot, and I'm just taking a bunch of slicing cuts. And I'll go across, I'll pull it across and cut it against the plastic. How's that? Okay, that was a tough little piece of balsa. Alright, let's get it back in the groove here. Whatever you do, you don't want to cut that end short. You'd rather have it a little bit long, but if it's too long, it's going to interfere with the piece from the other side, and it'll keep getting in your way till you trim it off. Okay, I'm going to lightly get it in there and lightly snug up this screw, and then inspect the rest of it. Make sure it gets outside of the frame up jig. Loosen that screw, slide the clamp in, snug up that screw, and then we can come in making sure it's laying down in there. And you don't want to push too hard. You can real easily put a kink in the balsa outline, so just be careful with your with what you're pushing it down with. Alright, got one side down. Now we'll get the other side. And similarly, we want to cut it off somewhere around the middle of the spar slot. We'll final trim it once we have the spar in there a little bit later. The end is getting tangled with the other piece, so I'll just lift it a little, let it go over top of the other piece. And where'd my push stick go? Here we go. When you get into a routine on this, it goes pretty quick. Your first time, just really take your time on this, getting this situated into the slot. My first couple tries at this, I ruined some outlines, but you get a feel for it after a while. Alright, this one is fine to clamp. We're still a little high on this one, so I'm going to loosen that screw a little, pull out a little, and yeah, it'll drop right in there. Okay, and then this one needs to come in a little and clamp a little more. There we go. Do the same there. Just work around clamping it good and tight. Just going around and loosening the screw just a hair, and clamping it down. That one looked a little bit high there. There we go, it just dropped in. So I'm pulling in on the rail, loosen the screw, and then tighten it. Alright, perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the boron in on this side of the outline, and then we're going to flip the outline and put boron in on the other side. So we'll get all the boron in on that outline in one sitting. So time to get our boron pen ready, our 90% glue, our boron tips, a few full pieces of 3/1000 boron. It's going to need about 18 inches to go all the way around, so we're going to need 2 pieces for the outline. Looks like we're about out of boron in that tube. That's partials in there. That's 4. Okay, well we got 2 pieces. That'll get us through this. Alright, so we still need a brush and our boron pen. Okay, let me get my eyes on again. You want to have a good clear area to work in because you're going to want to be able to slide this around and get different angles on it. So yeah, just clear off any unnecessary clutter. Get a good clean working area where you got enough room to spin this around as needed. The boron's going to go on in one piece all the way around. So we're going to start at one end, and I like to work up here where I can see it away from me, so I'm going to end up turning the base around as I come around. Alright. We'll get out the piece of wire for sealing the boron cup. Get out a boron applicator. This is, as I've shown before, a Teflon CA tip, and we need to get all of the acetone out of it. Looks like we got a couple of chunks of dry glue in it, so we'll pull the wire through and then touch it to a paper towel to draw the acetone out by capillary force. Slow moving acetone today. There it goes. I think it finally got a chunk of something that was blocking it. I just dragging across a paper towel on the tip till it pulls all that acetone out. Gonna get our long reach hypodermic, stick it all the way in, squeeze until we start filling, and back it out so we don't get air bubbles. We are getting a few chunks and flakes in there. I think it's probably time to mix some more glue, but we'll go with this. Alright, put that in the pen. We've got our chisel point piece of balsa ready and a piece of boron. to get the boron well wetted. Oh, sometimes I forget this. We take our dirty acetone that we store the tips in, and we brush a quick coat onto the balsa outline, and that wets the surface, gets it ready to accept the glue, primes it if you will. Pump the boron a few times to make sure the tip is wetted. Oh no, I just broke my chisel. Alright, it's too short to work with that chisel now. So we need to make a new chisel real quick. I'm going to take a piece of basswood and just sand it. I don't want the chisel to be a knife blade. I don't want to damage my balsa. So I'm going to make it, sand it down to about a knife, and then I sand the end a little till it's about 25 thousandths wide. Alright, now we got one. See if we can get this boron started. I don't want to push down on the end of the outline where it's suspended over the spar channel. So I'm just leaving an extra centimeter or so there, and I'm angling the boron tip to guide the boron straight down the middle of the outline there. So just be patient, take your time, and guide it down that middle. Alright, now as we get to the tip, we've got to work with our chisel a little bit. And just incrementally hold it in place so we don't pull it short across the curve there. So your chisel is your important tool at this end, because even without applying pressure to the boron on the pen, it tends to pull it and short circuit that end there. I think I've dried it out there. I pulled it a couple times and it pulled off that end, so I'm actually going to force it back into the pen a little bit and make a second pass at it here. Okay. Once you get past that curve, you don't have to hold it quite so often with the chisel. But I'm angling it pretty good to make sure it gets right down the center line of my balsa wood there. I applied a funky angle there and it backed it off. So we do start curving here, and bringing your chisel back into play might help you here. I'm going to come across and break it off. I'll have to come in and touch up that end a little. Now I've got a little bit left in the gun, or the pen, and I'm going to start just past the first rib and double up my boron in this section between the spar and the first rib. Alright, and then I'll do the same thing on the starting side. I have a little spare there that we'll have to work down later. Just past that first rib and then lift and break it. I've got about inch and a quarter left in the pen. So if I pass this rod through it, I can get that piece out. It's probably not good for much anything. I'll go right to the trash with it. If you had a piece of blue tape laying around, you could throw it on that. We don't have to let that dry too long. It doesn't take much. It's already grabbed most places. We've got wet glue in the gun, or in the pen, and we don't want to have this sticking down too much. So we're going to go ahead and loosen the fence. And slide the fence away. Watch for it to be caught. We don't want to break the outline. So if it's caught at some places, especially if the fence has been used a few times, maybe has some old glue on it, you may need to just run a blade through there. The wax definitely helps. But so much easier than freehanding this thing down. Alright, so we've got the two sides loose. Now we're going to loosen the end cap. Now the outline is symmetric. So, and all of the twist, everything about this is symmetric. So flipping it, we should get the same shape. Alright, we're on top of it here somehow. Here, instead of getting stuck to the fence, it got stuck to the building jig there, but that's okay. Flip it over, and I actually broke the outline at the very tip. We'll just put a dot of glue in there once we get it situated. Since it's already got the boron on the bottom, it's dropping in there pretty nicely. I'm going to add that drop of glue. The boron held the outline together, but I got a break in the wood, so we're going to fix that up real quick with a little bit of 10%. It'll soak in while we're doing the rest of this. Same process. It's behaving a little better now that it's got boron on one side. We're just going to work it into that groove, lightly clamp it, and then we'll come back and tighten up those clamps just a little bit. This clamp, it's wanting to spring in a little, so the screw is still loose, and I'm just pulling out on the fence a little bit, get the outline down in the groove there, and then let it spring back in, and we'll lightly snug it with the screw. Alright. Alright, this will be the final position for it, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can cut the outline right on the middle of the spar slot, so I can get them to meet each other and not have to cross over each other. Again, better to cut multiple times than to cut it all at once and cut it too far. I'm actually missing a screw there because I got the threaded insert a little crooked in there, and that screw just doesn't do the job. Carefully cut the second side of the outline so it meets the first side. Okay. We are looking to be laid down pretty nicely in there. Let's loosen this end cap and just make sure we're down in the groove. Snug it up. Now, remind me when we get to that point, we've put a little bit of glue on the wood there. It's probably stuck to the outline cap. and we don't want to break the outline taking it all apart later. So we need to run the blade through that end before we loosen everything up. Alright, second piece of boron. We pull the wire through the skinny end, and that makes sure it stays primed and no air bubbles in there. Soak the end of the boron, and then again we'll make sure it has plenty of excess at the end. I actually got my finger in there to hold it down because I didn't pick up my holding piece. That's good. Alright, guiding it right down the center line of the outline. And now I need the chisel. Just kind of incrementally get it down. I see a good glue bead going down on the boron. I actually got to the outside of the circle that time, so I'm going to back it up. Oh, you know what? I did not wet the wood first. That's a rookie mistake. They usually work okay without wetting the wood. Really steering it a lot to try and keep it from shortcutting the curvature here. You'll find you can hold the pen at different angles to do different things with that boron. And then we'll break it off at the end there. Looks like it came up a little bit, so I'm going to try and coax it back on. We may need to do that after the fact. It's tangling up with the neighboring boron. Yeah, that glue comes out with it, the 90% glue, grabs it pretty quick, and if you knock it loose right before the glue grabs, sometimes it's going to need a little bit of extra 10% glue to glue it down, and I think that's the case here. I had a good bond, and then it lifted when I went to break the end off. There, that got it. So I just added a little bit of 10% glue and then coaxed the boron back on. Alright, and then from right outside the first rib, just lay it down next to its buddy there and break it off. Alright, perfect. Okay, we've got about a 3-inch piece of boron left there, so we'll wipe that off and save that. Alright, we're going to let that sit a moment while we boron up some other pieces. We're going to need boron on the rib, and we're going to need boron on the spar. Just the one rib. I have a tool for that, and I'll have to find that tool, so I'm going to pause it. Alright, here's my rib tool. It's got the curvature of the rib. It's got a slot that's wide for the boron tool, and then it's 25 thousandths at the bottom of the slot for the rib. It has that top and bottom, so you can get the top and bottom of the rib coated with boron. So, well, that's not a good rib. I thought I had a good rib on the table here. Here we go. We just need to put boron on one of the ribs. Okay, so I'll just set that aside, and we're going to get the boron pen out. I'm going to run the metal wire through it just to clear it. And then we've got 2 pieces of boron selected that are slightly longer than the rib. Put one in. Oops, missed. This is a full-length rib, and we only need the boron on as long as the slot in this device. And then we get the concave side. There's a wee bit of boron left in there. Throw that puppy out on a piece of tape. Get another scrap of boron. Pull the wire through. Keep forgetting this stuff. This does help the bond. Put a stripe of that on there. Okay, and then you want to go ahead and coax the rib out before all of that dries, so you don't get it stuck in here. There we go. Alright, next we'll set up to work on the spars. I'm not sure I can keep this glue in the applicator long enough to set up my spars for boron. So let me pause, see if we can get that. Alright, I'm going to show you something that most of you won't need to do. The style of VP I'm developing still actually has a 1mm tubing, carbon tubing for the center section hub, and that goes into the end of the spar. And then I have some 0.041 ID polyamide tubing that we'll put in there as a bearing surface. Not ready to publish that yet, but I just wanted to show you what I'm doing here. This is 3D printed. It's got an 1/8 inch hole in one side, and it's got a 1 millimeter, no, it's got about a 75 thousandths hole on the other side, and in the middle it's got a 1 millimeter pass through. And so I slip that over the spar on the 75 thousandths side, and then I take a 1 millimeter bit in my Dremel and I extend it out to expose the 1/8 inch shank a bit, and then I just run that in the back side here till it bottoms out, and that gives me a perfectly concentric, I hope, hole in the end of the spar. Alright, and then I take my polyamide tubing and I shove it in there. It goes maybe a centimeter, and then I take some thin CA. Wouldn't you know it, it's plugged. There we go. Drop of thin CA with a capillary applicator. This is the only dot of CA on my whole plane. And get it onto that polyamide tubing, and it wicks right in. Then I'll cut off the polyamide tubing, flush with the end of the spar, and that one's all set. This one it took a chunk out of the spar when I drilled it, so we'll get another spar. That's why I have spares. Spar slipped out a little there. Okay. Little dot of CA to lock in the polyamide, and we started to break out through the side here. So these spars are slightly smaller in diameter than what I had been working with, so I need to remake that little fixture. Alright, so now we've got the bearings installed on the spars, and we're ready to add boron to the spars. I'm going to use our normal boron table to do that, and we'll take a moment and set that up. I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my boron board up. This is the aluminum 1/8 by 1/2 inch is glued to the board. This is a piece of 32nd by 1/2 brass shim, which is being used to clamp the spar in place. Normally I use a thicker, say a 1/16 inch straight edge. Let's try that and see what it looks like. Of course it's much longer, so I'm banging things around on the tabletop here. That's actually going to work. Let's just use that. The reason I was setting it up with the 32nd inch is because this end is only a 32nd inch, or a little bit bigger in diameter, And I wasn't sure the tip was going to get down in there, but it will. So that gives a better clamping action here. On the end of the spar, I put 4 marks at 90 degrees apart. And I'm going to just lay down a piece of boron on each of those marks. And this time we'll try not to forget wetting the surface to make it more receptive. And using the 1/8 inch tall piece of aluminum as a guide, we just run that along the length of the spar. Then we can rotate the spar 90 degrees. Use our dirty acetone to prime the surface. Not doing a great job of steering it straight down, but close enough. You can see this process is a lot quicker than the old-fashioned boron application process. If you get one really crooked, you can come back later, loosen it up with a little bit of acetone and straighten it out. But I should be applying a little bit more pressure with my thumb on the boron, like that. Yeah, that was a straight one. All I'm doing is holding down just a little bit with my thumb. That tightens the boron. Whenever you're doing a straight shot like these spars, that helps. Okay, we'll get the second one in here. That one went a little crooked the whole way. Alright. one's going to need touch up. I can't seem to grab the end of it with my grabber. Alright, what the heck's going on here? My chisel may have gotten unflat from... Oh, there we go, we got it. Alright, I'm getting little beads of glue. I think I over-thinned my glue just a little bit. That's usually a sure sign of that. And you start getting little beads. Alright, that piece of boron's too short. So we need to break out one more piece for two more sides of that spar. Not sure I wetted that yet. Well, it's doing it again. I just can't seem to clamp the end of it. I'm going to take my sanding block and just clean up the end of that chisel a little bit. I don't know if you can see that coming off with some little beads of glue. That's a sure sign that I put too much thinner into the glue. You don't want much, just enough to promote keeping it fluid in there. That should be just long enough. Alright, we'll let that set up. Get a little paper towel and clean out my fitting. It might have just had too much acetone in the tip here, and that mixed with the glue that I put in, but sure is acting like my glue is too thin. It was too thick this morning, so I added a little acetone and may have overdone it. That away, that away. Alright, our next step, so I got two spars done. That's one for each blade. We're just building one blade right now for the video. So the next step will be putting the ribs and the spar onto the outline, and then we'll let that dry probably overnight. So that we don't have any complications from that. Alright, I'm going to pause it while I get my ribs. Alright, I got a bunch of ribs out here. I took my spar and I slipped it in from this end until the root of my spar matched the line that matches my VP. So that's the inner end of where I want the spar. It goes a little beyond the rib. Then I took a piece of scrap wood and made a wedge and ran it in this way because my spar's tapered and I don't want it laying down at the bottom of the spar channel. I want it centered on the center line of the prop, which is about the top of the spar channel. So we just wedge that up a little bit with a piece of scrap wood, and then we get our ribs out. And if you remember, we always start with the middle rib because that's the largest rib, and if we by mistake cut it too small, we can use it in one of the other positions. If we start at the ends with the small ones and work to the middle, then if we break a middle one, we've already done the smaller ones and we can't salvage it for nothing. So I'm going to carefully put that in there and try to mark where it's going to intercept the other outline edge. Guide the blade with my finger, holding as close as possible to where I'm cutting so I don't break the end of the rib. Then I'm going to carefully set the rib in there and see how it fits. That looks pretty good. Maybe a hair tight, but I think it's alright. Alright, I'm going to take a drop of 10% glue. Let me prime my gun. The 10% will easily soak down in. Now you want to make sure the rib is flush with the top of the outline, not sinking down to the bottom. If it's the outline is a little bit taller than the rib, especially as we go to the root end. So you'll be covering on the top side, so you want the top side lined up. Now I'm using as small a drop as possible. That wasn't small. Get a scrap of paper towel on the table to wipe my tip on. Alright, so that's one down, bunch to go. Don't forget the innermost one is the one going to be the one with the boron on it. As we come out here, the outline becomes more and more slanted, which gives us a little bit of leeway to adjust how the rib fits. That center one's the hardest because the two outlines are pretty much parallel to each other at that point. Alright, that looks good. Just pull it up a little so it's flush with the top. Make sure it's standing up. Alright. Drop a 10% to prime the surface or pre-glue. If you're crushing your rib when you try and cut it, get yourself a sharper blade. These ribs were already sliced in my box, so you didn't get to see my slicing process. If you are using tweezers like you see me here, you don't want to squeeze very hard at all. You can easily crush this 25,000 square rib. Alright. Okay, that one's sitting a little proud, so we'll push it down a tad. And this end maybe sank down a little bit. No, it looks pretty flush. Make adjustments while the glue is still wet to the angle. Make sure she's standing up nice and straight. And then get your drop of 50-50 on there. Kind of bracing my fingers. Alright. One more dry rib and then we'll get the one with the boron on it. prime it with 10%. Alright, it's got too much flow. And we'll get my boron rib. Now this one we're going to have to trim both ends because the boron doesn't go to either end. And I'm going to cheat a little and use scissors. And if you remember, we said we might have to coax that boron down a little bit. Maybe the scissors wasn't a great idea, but sometimes it expedites it. Kind of hard to go through the boron and the balsa without doing damage to something. Alright, we got it cut there, but it did flex the boron off of the end a little bit. Alright, this one goes up and over the spar. And it's just getting real tight in there for my big hands. Alright, I'm going to do something a little different on this one. I'm going to get this one end tack glued with the 10%, and that'll help hold it in position while I get the other end. Nope, it let go. Let's put a dot of 50-50 on the end of it. I'm just having a hard time getting my fingers in there. So get that one end to grab a little bit. Alright, we got it positioned. Got a glue in there, and we'll put another dot on this side since we were pulling it around. Alright, now you'll notice it's not sitting on the spar, it's up a ways. And what we'll do is we'll get a little bit of spar material. Hope that wasn't one of my good spars. I'm afraid it was. Yeah, I've scattered all my stuff back here, and actually I've got one wet, broke one apart. Alright, let's get just a swipe of still rectangular square spar material. We don't want to add a lot of weight with this, but we're going to make a piece to go in there. I'm cutting a slight wedge on the end of it. So it just fits under there. Might have to sand the wedge onto it a little bit. The cutting's not working so well. Okay, so that about fits. And what I'm going to do is put in a piece that's a bit oversized, so we don't have to get it perfect. We've got a wedge shape to it. And let's cut it a little narrower side to side. There we go. Now we've got a wedge about 1/4 of an inch long, maybe goes from a 1/16 down to a 32nd. We'll slip it in here from the back side, from the prop blade side, and then we're going to wet it with some 10%, both to the rib and to the spar. Put a drop of 50/50 on it, to the rib and to the spar. And now that locks the spar into that rib. And then finally we're going to come in here and we're going to glue the outlines and the boron to the spar. You want to make sure the bottom borons went below the spar and the top borons went above the spar. And unfortunately, when I slipped the spar in there, I actually broke both outlines a little bit. So I'm going to actually have to come back in with a little bit of wood after we get it out of this contraption. To make sure those outlines get to the spar. Yeah, I've got one of my bottom borons is actually coming up to the top here. So we'll scooch that out of the way. Get the top borons glued down, and I think I need to do a slight redesign in here, give myself a little more room to work so I can get those bottom borons underneath the spar. The fixture isn't allowing that right now. This might be a freehand job once it's all said and done here. Alright, so I'm going to get a little bit of balsa in there and repair those ends and make sure the boron joins it all together. And then we're going to let that sit for a few hours before we try to cut anything apart. But at this point, we're going to end the video there. Next step will be covering this. So we'll have to get it out. I'll show that in the video, but I think we're done with that video for